Recording is on.
Okay, so if you hadn't got the email from Salman, my name is Ollie Wood. I'm a freelance journalist and a digital rights researcher, mainly focusing at the moment on social media platforms and large corporate entities that own them, and how they're influencing political discourse and the relevant impact that has on sort of geopolitics. I worked for a very small Palestinian NGO a couple of years ago, and at the onset of the genocide, I'm sure as all of you saw, there was a wealth of users alleging or reporting like varying degrees of censorship and punitive moderation that were impacting their work in a variety of ways, or impacting their personal life in a variety of ways. I was put onto a couple of LinkedIn users in sort of February 2024, so 5-6 months into the genocide, and they essentially what they were reporting was that they would post about Palestine, they would post about the occupation, they would post about critical things of Israel, and then they would suffer sort of punitive moderation, and they would sometimes be removed from the platform because of that, and that was having real world implications, losing their job, that kind of stuff. So I spent the past couple of years interviewing the likes of Salman, various other LinkedIn users about their experiences on the platform. And it was sort of vaguely to find out how these corporate entities that were also involved in sort of what they call like dual use technologies, which is essentially cloud software, AI, how that was being used within the Israeli state, and how that was being used to target and sort of rank victims of the genocide, and also try and sort of manipulate the digital information environment in a way that is favorable to Israel. What I think is quite interesting about this particular niche is that Microsoft, Meta, Google, they've poured extensive resources into doing so, into manipulating the digital information environment. But there is also a degree of sort of just executive compliance or tech worker compliance.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry, Ali. Salman, I think there are other open mics that are introducing noise. Can you mute those?
Yes, absolutely. Will do.
Perhaps including your own. I don't know if yours is on also.
I think it might be.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. I think that's everyone. Sorry. Essentially, what I was interested in researching was how these corporate entities that are facilitating a genocide through allowing Microsoft or Meta or whomever to use their dual use technologies for targeting, are also terraforming the political discursive landscape in favor of sort of Western hegemonic ideologies in the Arab world. And particularly what I found interesting was the way that vast resources were being pumped into these corporate entities or VLOPs, very large online platforms. But there was also a degree of compliance within the corporate structure that allowed for anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab racism, Islamophobia, degrees of racial capitalism to sort of run wild within the corporation or within the platform, that then had an obvious knock-on effect on the way that language was being moderated, that users were being moderated. Essentially, what I'm most interested in, or what I was most interested in at the time, was understanding how sort of the old system of manufacturing consent compared to the new one. We live in a digital age, and increasingly online platforms like Facebook and Instagram, as much as we don't like it, they are really the sort of the one of the primary arenas for political discourse. So most people get their news from Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn or whatever, and it's less from cable news or meeting some bloke at Hyde Park Corner, or I don't know, talking to people on the tube, or however you used to get your political news. And yeah, what I essentially found was I interviewed a fair few tech workers, a fair few users, other people working within Microsoft, and particularly what the tech workers relayed was quite a sort of an astounding level of anti-Palestinian racism. And they were having to work quite hard, or still are having to work quite hard, to crack down on this dissent, to suppress this dissent. I'm sure that many of you keep up with, DropSite, other very reputable outlets that report on this quite consistently. But they banned certain words within internal emails, like Palestine, genocide, other phrases that are related to Israel's occupation and genocide in Gaza and the West Bank. They fired workers fairly consistently. And what I found was from October 2023 to now, there was a real constriction in dissent. Symbolic sort of dissent, like having a little watermelon pin, was suddenly unacceptable within Microsoft. It was anti-Semitic, it was anti-Israel, whatever they called it. It wasn't allowed. And so what I saw at the time was that there was a broadening of what the definition of dissent was, and there was a constricting of what like acceptable political discourse was. And this had a real-time effect on users, right? So if you're on LinkedIn, I'm sure that you would have noticed that there was a sort of a punitive application of moderation policies, particularly the banning of posts, the banning of users, shadow banning, if you'd like to call it that, and also the use of what's it called? I always forget, the sensitivity warnings. They were used quite widely. What was quite interesting about LinkedIn in comparison to the other major platforms that have been studied throughout this 2-year genocide, or ongoing genocide, is that LinkedIn sort of acted more impromptu in the way that it moderated discourse. When you look at Facebook or any meta platforms, they have quite a broad and quick acting moderation system. LinkedIn, it's to me at least, LinkedIn sort of opted for a more user-based moderation policy. So, if you had a few Zionist users that were following you, they would flag your post, or if you used From the River to the Sea, your post would be flagged, and then very quickly, the second sort of the automated moderation would move in. But what was quite odd is that in the initial phases of moderation, the first phase, which is what LinkedIn calls it, which is effectively automated moderation at the time of creation, when you're typing your post and you click post, LinkedIn deploys this automated moderation method to basically read what you've written and then compare it to whatever guidelines that it was operating on at the time. And so again, what I found was sort of executives like Tamer Cohen and other senior members of LinkedIn were leveraging their seniority effectively to constrict opposition on the platform and to sort of silence users. And this control was fairly extensive. Obviously, there's some stuff that I can't say, but there was from what I found, a lot of tech workers it was known that the moderation policy was sort of being engineered or molded in favor of Israel. And if you go on LinkedIn now, that's fairly clear, right? I have a couple of friends that post, or I had a friend, that posted about meeting Gary Lineker outside of a play. If you don't know who Gary Lineker is, he was like a pretty great English number 9 and forward, a footballer, and he's been hosting like Match of the Day and fairly classic TV shows in the UK. And he's been posting fairly unfavorably of Israel, let's say, and he was fired. So he's kind of become like a cult figure within sort of the pro-Palestinian movement in London, particularly. Someone met him at a play. There's a picture of him and Gary Lineker outside of the play, and that was given a sensitivity warning because it mentioned Gaza, and it had an article attached to it that that talked about the murder of a journalist family. That link was then used to basically remove the post. And you see sensitivity warnings, you click okay, I accept the sensitivity warning, and a picture of Gary Lineker comes up. It's lots of that kind of stuff, right? Look, very benign posts that aren't really saying anything that radical. Basically, users are saying that we should adhere to international law, which most people should be saying anyway. That gets punitive moderation. From the river to the sea will get punitive moderation. Anything kind of associated with critiques of Israel will get moderation. Will get moderated. Sorry. And over time, what I found was, I interviewed people for over a long period of time, is that there was a degree of self-censorship that was proliferating. So if you're a user and you use LinkedIn for for your professional life, which most LinkedIn users do, they were weighing up the cost of being outspoken on LinkedIn and paying rent or your mortgage or supporting your family or surviving. And I think that is the niche. That is the crux of LinkedIn, essentially, is that it holds significant power over people's professional lives, where they work, their financial well-being, and it leverages that against their political dissent, effectively. LinkedIn is the only, well, it's not the only one, but it is the preeminent sort of professional platform, and continuing to allow a platform with such sway to have such leverage over people's humanitarian opinion, or humanitarian advocacy, is not a recipe for success, or is not a recipe for adhering to international humanitarian values at all. I wanted to talk a little bit about the outcomes, but I also thought that maybe this was a good time to ask if anyone has any questions about something in particular, or anything really. That's effectively what the study was. I worked on it for 2 years, and there's been a few other extra elements of it that obviously weren't included. There's, ad campaigns are a particular focus at the moment. If you've been reading DropSite, I'm sure that you're aware. Access Now are also sort of are building on this view that sort of major platforms are spreading propaganda for war through their advertising models. Yeah, that's essentially the study.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to add a comment and ask a question. So comment was like, I spoke to a LinkedIn employee, which the details I shared with you as well. And they basically said that they had a internal discussion about the river to the sea phrase, and they just decided blank policy in a 1-hour meeting that phrase is hateful and falls under their hateful category. And like, who knows, hundreds or maybe even thousands of people have been permanently banned for repeatedly using that phrase. And it's kind of ridiculous, question. So when you first shared this study, a number of us did worked on like sharing this as far and wide as possible, including a couple of contacts within LinkedIn. And one thing that I noticed, I don't know if it was your study that made a difference, but 3 people that were being shadow banned and were permanently restricted, but then their permanent restriction was removed. Just like a week or so after the study was published, they were no longer shadow banned, and now their accounts are kind of back to normal reach. And have you noticed any effects of your study, any impacts of your study on LinkedIn?
Just to touch on your first point, you mentioned from the river to the sea statement. So in my research, there were some conflicting accounts, but essentially, I don't know if you remember the oversight board for Meta, which is meant to be a separate board that discusses moderation efforts. It was kind of introduced after a series of scrubs from Meta, the Rohingya genocide and the 2021 attempts to ethnically cleanse East Jerusalem. What happened is that OSB decided that From the River to the Sea was not anti-Semitic or racist in any way. And what I heard was very soon after that, the legal team called an emergency meeting where they discussed that decision and the potential implications that might have for LinkedIn. And they quickly decided to basically to stick with their guns and continue to label it as anti-Semitic. In terms of what you were saying about LinkedIn, like easing its moderation of pro-Palestinian views, I don't know. I struggled to get it shared on LinkedIn. I think that my impressions were down, but in a way that I was kind of expecting anyway. I think that posting anything critical of LinkedIn, particularly of its stance on Israel's genocide, I think was going to be a tough ask anyway. But I do that there were a couple of phases. There were a couple of phases where LinkedIn seemed to sort of relax its punitive moderation. There are a few users that actually put me onto this in the first place, and they came back in sort of May 2025. Sorry. So I don't know whether it was exactly this study or it was the extensive pressure that LinkedIn users have been exerting on LinkedIn executives, right? Like, you guys have been consistent in your pressure, and I think that has real world consequences. I don't think, speaking to people at LinkedIn, they're not unaware of how unfair it is. I think that it's fairly widespread. I know I talked about like sort of passive compliance early on, but a lot of the tech workers I spoke to knew loads of people that thought the same way, that were tired of what they saw as sort of Zionist propaganda. I spoke to one person who said that they met with a senior executive who kind of, shrugged their shoulders and were like, well, this is just Israeli efforts to manipulate social media platforms. Like, it just happens all the time, and there's nothing they can do about it. And so it seems to be, it's difficult to tell, basically, is what I'm saying.
Right. Colin, please. Colin has had muting issues in the past.
If you type it up, I'm happy to read an answer.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Hello.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Technical. So I was banned for several months on LinkedIn earlier this year, and just I at the end of that, I got a chance to talk with one of their moderators in Utah or somewhere, and they were telling me that there is this sort of pre-vetting with AI before anything goes live. And my comment just logically was like, well, if you can do that electronically, why don't you do it before we post? Why don't you pre-vet the post and then say, oh no, this fails because of X, Y, Z. Anyway, she said she was going to pass that on, but I have a question for you. The whole Gaza thing seems to me sort of extraordinary in that there's this minority of people that have tremendous power and see themselves as permanent victims. I was just wondering if you'd ever compared Gaza with any other human rights oppression war or whatever, like with the Uyghurs or Rohingya, Darfur, Iraq, Venezuela. Is there any other occasion where you're only allowed to support one side and not the other?
I mean, absolutely. I'm born in like the epicenter of racial capitalism and colonialism, right? Like, London is, you go anywhere and you can see the residue of that. You can go back even further, right? Like, I read this really great book, I think it was called, by Caroline Elkins. Fantastic work on British colonialism. And what you see is, it's just a sort of effectively after the First War, well, really after the Berlin Conference in 1885, there is this humanitarian rhetoric that is, humanitarian obviously in quotation marks, that is perpetuated by Western European states and the United States, that effectively says, it's the classic sort of the savage other and the enlightened white people, right? Is that we are acting out of best, we as in Britain are acting out in the best interest of everyone involved. But there are a few people within the area that we're trying to control that are, are making things difficult. And these are, they used to be savages, and then they kind of turned to, there were a couple of other words they use, and eventually they kind of end on terrorists, right? Like terrorism after 9/11, terrorism is kind of the word that's used. Before that, it's sort of like mafia, crime bosses, whatever. There's a conception of what the forces that are that are opposing the state. The language is exactly the same. Like you look at the black and tans arriving in Ireland during the sort of Irish resistance to British colonialism. Those black and tans soldiers who are effectively people suffering from PTSD after the First World War are then sent to Palestine in the 30s to suppress the Barak revolt, and then also are then sent to Malaya in the 1950s to suppress the Malayan emergency. And we just sort of, you look at particularly British imperial history, it's just sort of, I don't know, interspersed with these exact instances, right? During the Malayan emergency, we see sort of Malayan folk resisting British imperialism, and they're put into towns and villages, which are essentially concentration camps, right? And what they say is that this is just a method in which we are weeding out basically the terrorists, the people that are resisting us, and we are putting the compliant folk in, or the people that can't resist, within these towns and villages, so they can learn to use a knife and fork and speak in English or whatever the fuck. It's literally exactly the same. We just see this happen time after time. It's the same thing. I think that understanding Gaza as a new phenomenon does colonialism a huge injustice, right? Like, it's incredibly efficient at killing lots of people, resetting the narrative, and making it about something that it's not really about. Obviously, during the Malayan emergency, we had, large corporate interests owning media outlets, and now we have large corporate interests owning the digital space. I think it's become slightly more, the way that language is, or the discourse is controlled, has become slightly more, intensely more intrusive, right? Like I was saying at the beginning, when you're having political discussions with people, it's one-on-one, it's on the tube, it's walking to work, it's on the bus, it's in a cafe, wherever. Now we are, whatever space that we are in, if we are having discussions online, unless it's a super secure app, that is at the whim of whoever owns the digital space that you're acting in, right? And that is a level of control that we've never seen before. And that's the real kind of difference. It's not really the discourse, it's the way that the discourse is managed. Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Colin. Sorry, that kind of, I went on a little bit of a tangent.
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, it's all about social media, isn't it? This sort of blanket suppression of dissent. That wasn't possible, during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Now, you can do it with a flip of a switch,
Yeah.
So,
well, and in Ireland as well, you read the telegrams sent to the British forces that were suppressing the terrorism, I guess, the Republicans in Ireland, and their rhetoric is exactly the same as the Israeli state. They say exactly the same things. They say, look, there's this population that we're going to have to treat them as guilty until proven innocent, because they're causing too much trouble, right? They're making it very difficult to get our way in Ireland, and we have to sort of invert judicial proceedings in order to suppress whatever it is. It's the same, it's the same thing.
Yeah, thank you.
Wow, that's very insightful. Like, history is continuing, the colonial history is continuing to repeat itself. One important question I want to ask you before you have to go is,
I have a bit of extra time. Sorry, it's not on the dot.
Okay. So let us know. No pressure, as always. And so, what besides sharing your report far and wide, what additional, like what things can we do, with this great work that you have done? And like, for example, I had a friend who's connected to Deanna Hyzon, who's mentioned in your report, who's featured in your report, and head of escalations at LinkedIn, one of them, regional ones, and so he shared the report directly with her, and she kind of gave a generic response saying, "Oh, we stand by our policies and etc." Something normal corporate speak. But anyways, what can we do to support you and your work in relation to this report?
That's a difficult question. I think that the odds are quite stacked against us. I'm not going to lie. We live in quite a scary time. I think supporting the NGOs that are funding this work is crucial, right? Like 7amleh are, which is spelled 7 is in Arabici, 7amleh. They're on a donation drive right now. They're doing fantastic work. The People versus Big Tech are also really fantastic. Following individual researchers and journalists is also very helpful. I mean, obviously, the fact that we're writing about suppressing dissent and censorship often means that researchers are themselves then suppressed when they try and publish that information. So any attempt to sort of widely share stuff from Access Now or whomever will always be helpful. And also, like what you're doing now, Salman, like creating our own communities where we can discuss pertinent topics, and issues that are just not going to get pushed on any kind of platform. That's crucial. I actually quickly want to touch on that Deanna Hyzon thing. I think that I didn't bring it up in my initial introduction, but I think that was probably the most galling element of the study, was just sort of sheer let's call it bias towards Israeli narratives. I don't know, just in case nobody has read it, it's 40 pages, it's a bit of a slog, but in case someone hasn't read it, basically Deanna Hyzon is head of escalations, and prominent LinkedIn users, when they experience issues, they go to escalations because basically LinkedIn don't want to lose user traffic. They'll go to Deanna, or they'll go to someone from escalations and they say, "I'm having this problem. I'm not getting as much reach as usual. What are you going to do about it?" Basically, there was a fella called Hillel Fuld, who is I believe he is a settler still in the West Bank. His brother was killed in Efrat Junction. He was also a settler in some kind of gunfire. I can't really remember. The long and short of it is he's a fairly extreme Israeli commentator and seems to act in some pretty important tech circles in Israel. He was posting, let's say, unfavorable things about Palestinians, posting pictures of AI generated content of a guy in a press vest, a guy in a doctor's whites, and then a guy with the Hamas bandana on, and would post things like Palestinians choosing what to dress in the morning, or videos of Palestinian kids throwing stones and using that as an excuse to shoot them, basically. He was saying a lot of unfavorable things on LinkedIn and got banned. He got deplatformed. It took a while for him to get deplatformed. I think that he got flagged like 7 or 8 times for clearly inciting violence. And then he met with Deanna Hyzon over Skype, and he posted about it on LinkedIn. He said, "Thank you for meeting me, Deanna. Just want everyone to know," because there's this like there is in any circle at the moment, there is a narrative that it's the Israelis that are being suppressed, and that Palestinians are getting too much narrative, even though there are numerous studies about confronting the actual data of that and proving that point wrong. He says, LinkedIn aren't anti-Israeli, they aren't anti-Semitic. And then he goes on to make he will just continue to make dehumanizing content and sort of cheering on this genocide. And I think this is really where the moderation turns into action for LinkedIn. It acts as a political, like a distributor of political knowledge, in that allowing these users to continue means that it just sort of flattens the sort of the moral landscape, right? Like if you're someone who doesn't know anything about what's going on, you know, you live in your own little bubble, you're doing B2B sales or whatever you're doing, you read that and you go, oh, this guy might have a point, you know, like maybe they are terrorists. Those small moments are what completely, you know, obliterates human morality. It's just sort of passive acceptance of things, that this is just how things are. And because we are so deep in sort of scrolling, meta algorithms, whatever, it's going to be very difficult to unlearn those things, and continuing to allow those things to perpetuate on platforms, throwing out literal war propaganda in the case of the sort of the UNRWA ads that were on Google, whatever. It just continues to create an environment in which these things are just going to continue to happen. And as it's normalized, and as major companies that are, I don't know if you heard, but Palantir just basically won a contract with the NHS, where they're going to manage all of it's called the FDP, where they're going to manage all of the patient data for NHS patients. They're just going to sort of seep into everything. And these extreme acts of violence are going to be normalized. And we need to be doing anything we can to stop that happening. I think that's, you know, yeah.
All right. Ted's been patiently waiting. Ted, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Salman. I actually put my
question. For some reason, I can't get it up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just put my question and I'll read it out. First of all, I want to congratulate you on a very good report and a very important topic. So I wrote out my question and I'll read it out since this is going to be recorded. Yours and almost all other arguments and complaints about digital rights are based on the legal, fair, ethical standards that LinkedIn supposedly operates under. In reality, LinkedIn and other entities, not just tech entities, all the way up to the United Colonists and other nations, the UN, operates on a profit motive. And aligning with a colonial-aligned country in their mass theft of land and mass murder of aid recipients is profitable for all concerned, whereas Palestine is not. So it's more of a statement than a question. Is my theory is that what we're experiencing is removal of the masks where their true value, profit over respect for property rights, as well as the lives of women and children and other non-combatant civilians are revealed. This, I believe, is what we're really dealing with.
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that particularly in the West, the sort of liberalism has I mean, it's sort of on the way down now. But when you see liberalism really kick off in from sort of 1850 onwards, you see a lot of these thinkers come up with this idea, like this utopian vision of what a global community will be like. And it's kind of secondary to free markets, right? It's basically the market is going to provide for us and therefore we're going to be free in X, Y number of ways. And obviously that has mutated and lots of things, it's not as basic as that. But liberals in the West, or people that are sort of sympathetic to the Israeli points, but also they believe that they are humanitarian at their core. What they are being confronted with is the reality of power, right? That colonialism does not give a shit whether it's this is ethical. It's a product based. It's a goal oriented ideology, right? It will achieve what it wants to achieve, regardless of whether people think it's right or wrong. And I think what Gaza has shown a lot of people is that we might tout our sort of humanitarian verve and our charitable spirit, and our sort of anti-racism, particularly on the sort of the center of this political spectrum. But we're willing to do very little to dismantle real power, right? Corporate entities that have kind of been doing what they've wanted for sort of 300, 400 years or so. And that would be my response to that question. I think that major or sort of tech behemoths, I think, are the clearest expression of that, you know, and we're going to start to see more and more folk like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp who are more explicit in the way that they see the world, and we're going to be all shocked and you know, repost content of, I don't know, Alex Karp being really fidgety on a chair and be like, this guy is going to run the world. But unless we confront it, unless we you know, try and understand how the power works directly, then I think very little is going to change. The outlook is not great.
I think what's happened is that, you know, the whole, every entity that participates digitally, these are people as well as, you know, corporate entities, have revealed what their priorities are, whether their priorities are profit or whether their priorities are principle. And so the masks are off.
There's quite an interesting collision of ideologies. I think it's in the late 80s or early 90s. I can't remember when it happens, but basically the guy, I forget his name, Grateful Dead lyricist. He's founded the EFF, John Perry Barlow, right? He, as the internet kicks off, he basically writes the constitution for the internet, and it basically says all states aren't welcome here. The internet is a place without hierarchy. You know, it's going to liberate us from political authoritarianism and socioeconomic conditions, whatever. And another group, a hacking group, at the same time says, absolutely not. This is not how the internet works at all. Who owns the data banks? Who owns the software? Who owns all of these, you know, and also who is controlling where the data is going? And what they do is, I can't remember what the bank they hack into, but they basically break into this a banking system, and they download all of John Perry Barlow's credit data, and they say, look, you know, you might be denied a mortgage because your house, you know, you didn't pay this amount or something at this time, and therefore your credit's gone down. So in reality, the internet is arguably more has more hierarchy than the physical world, and we're just not aware of it because we can't see it happening. It's not a physical thing. Like in the real world, you know how hierarchy works because you see a policeman and he's got a big baton, or if you're in the States, he's got a big gun, and you're like, well, I don't have one of those. That doesn't happen in the digital world, right? We don't really see how forces are operating in the background unless you're immediately confronted with it. You know, you're moderated for saying Palestine. Your profile is removed because you said that you oppose a genocide.
Thank you. Rule has a question. Rule, please.
Maybe.
Your mic is not working. You are unmuted.
Oh.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Speaking of utopias, so right now is, we talked about capitalism, and the power is with the people who have the money, and that's how the control game is played a bit. Of course, in addition to physical military power, and it's perhaps changed over history. It's becoming more capitalistic. I'm not sure. I haven't studied this in depth, but it is. Do you believe that do you believe the majority of people are against the genocide in the world? As my understanding, the majority of people are against it, but people who are in power are pressured by the people with more power to continue it. U.S. and Israel, U.S. forces, the UN, Security Council, to go along with what their plan. Do you see, if the money were changed in some fundamental way, perhaps being redistributed with the democratic vote of the oppressed or the less or the less rich.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, is a more democratic, is a more equally democratic world, could that be more less oppressive, or will it be these people, or will there always be more people who want to oppress a minority, that the democratic view doesn't even work?
I mean,
Or work just a little bit better,
I try to operate on the base that it's the former, right? I like, you meet a bloke in the street, you're not immediately like, I want to punch this guy in the face and steal all his money. Like, I hope that basic human empathy and compassion, will triumph. Unfortunately, I think we live in a world where the latter has succeeded for so long that we can't imagine a different world. And I think if we're to take this into sort of the digital environment or the tech environment, is that before the genocide started, those forces were already there, right? I think I like to see sort of the suppression of dissent as kind of fluid, right? Like if it's not needed, it's not used. It's only really when the genocide kicked into fifth gear in sort of December 2023 is we start to see the moderation tools being used more effectively, more advertising, more whatever. It kicks into fifth and sixth gear when there is so much dissent. So when you see big corporate actors like Microsoft banning Palestine from emails, it means that they are aware that they don't have the power that we think that they have, right? They are effectively, these big platforms are built on users, right? I mean, obviously they're extracting our data and financializing us clicking on things, but if people don't go there to express their views, they don't make any money. That's how their model works. Like, it's not based on ad content, it's based on you spending as much time as possible on those apps. And they realize that is a weakness in the relationship, right? So they are effectively just trying to continue to keep people who are compliant on the platform, and then everyone else can kind of be sidelined. And that's a really effective way to control people. A lot of the people that I spoke to, tech workers, were basically saying there is this, instead of shadow banning, we should think of it as siloing, right? Shadow banning, difficult word to understand. Everyone says shadow banning. Siloing, effectively, when you say something that they don't like, they put you in a big silo with all the other people that are saying something that you don't like. And this is what I think a lot of people have experienced here, right? Is that on LinkedIn, you see all of the other people that are posting about Palestine, but you don't see anything else. You don't see anything else. And that's because you are in this little space where you're kind of putting it's a bit like when you put your kid in like the temper tantrum corner and you just let them, be angry for a couple of minutes. It's the same thing, but for users. And there was a reason I was linking that to, we see those methods be deployed more consistently when there is more dissent and there is more criticism of power. It's complex, but also more simple in the digital world, right? You can see it very effectively because you see your impressions go down, but you don't really understand why it's happening. And if you get no explanation, you're just like, well, maybe people don't like me anymore or something. I don't know. I hope that answered your question. Sorry, that was.
Yeah. If those people who are not siloed, but yet have a moral sense, but aren't informed and are perhaps more passive or lazy, if they could more easily vote, if they could just vote on, hey, no, that's wrong what they're doing in Palestine. I want, that to stop. And control whatever lever they have to make it stop. Is that, like, if that were the case, perhaps the genocide would have stopped already or never begun.
Yeah, I mean, I think albeit
because
belated.
Most people are like, let's say 65%, let's say 2/3
Yeah.
would vote like against the genocide.
Yeah, I mean, I
At
think
least
that
after 3 months of it, or 4 months
like
of it.
putting a stat on who opposes it and who is pro the genocide, whoever is pro genocide,
Right.
is a bit ridiculous, because it doesn't really matter what the global opinion. I mean, it does, but it doesn't really matter what everyone thinks. It matters what people who are acting think, right? I think that
And
creating
I
some kind of techno-feudal, techno-bureaucratic system where you vote on a policy, I think that's a dangerous, also a dangerous path to go down, right? Like you'd get quite a dystopic world quite quickly. But I think what the social media,
how
LinkedIn.
So but how so? Because media would spin it, and the the people paying attention to that media would vote for genocide.
Well, it's more that I think that they're just having a big kind of like techno-democratic system might not be the most useful, purely because we don't. It's one, it's hypothetical, so I don't know how it would work, and two, that system would have to be incredibly robust, right? Incredibly robust, and I am not technically minded enough to even conceive of a system where that was possible.
Okay.
And also,
that's what I'm getting at. I want to build that system.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 100 years time we'll have a little multiple choice app that you choose, and the world is just governed. But I don't know, I don't know necessarily that I want to be governed by, I don't, and I'm sure that a lot of people don't want to be governed by sort of a techno-bureaucratic system that makes decisions for us,
No, yeah. I mean, this is Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Oliver, I want to be mindful of your time. I know you had.
Don't worry, I'll probably have like 5 more minutes.
Okay,
is that
all right.
Okay?
So maybe we'll take one more question from
Yeah,
Gardy.
that's not good.
Gardy, please.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the work that you're doing. I have a question. So, is it your understanding that pretty much saying the same things on one side of the ledger, in, for instance, pro-Israel versus pro-Palestine, one will get you in trouble or will elicit a response, and the other one will not? For instance, we're talking about from the river to the sea. So if you contrast that with somebody who says, I don't know, from the river to the sea, Israel will remain Jewish.
Yeah.
And somebody else says, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which arguably are equivalent statements, and on different side of the different arguments. But so how does one deal with that? And would it be helpful to actually contrast these two statements and say, blatant hypocrisy?
Absolutely. I think a better study than mine would scrape extensive data on LinkedIn and quantitatively measure those that question, right? I tried to do that to some extent. If you type in from the river to the sea into the LinkedIn search bar, like the most sort of basic research method, what you see is you see a fair amount of content saying from the river to the sea, Israel will whatever, X, Y, Z. And you'll occasionally see one that slips through the cracks about Palestine, but it's often, it'll often be a contested post. There'll be a lot of people that are arguing in the comments. I don't know this for sure, but I would hazard a guess that some of that content remains up because it's getting a lot of interaction, right? And it's drawing users to the platform. I think that a comparison of the two, sort of a cursory comparison of the two, kind of shows how the moderation works already. Like you can see that people posting about Israel will get favorable moderation. Not all the time, sometimes someone will post something, barbaric to some degree, and they'll get moderated, but often not, right? There's an increasing amount of users that are using like savage or sort of very classic, like the kind of language that if you were to just disappear and then reappear next to like a fire around sort of English knights during the Crusade, the language wouldn't be that different, right? They talk about like the savage hordes. It's a lot of German users weirdly using very racist, appointed language. that is just getting no real moderation whatsoever. And when it's used, as in when the term savage is used in some kind of criticism, sometimes it's moderated. So it's difficult to fully answer that question without a quantitative study, but it's fairly clear that, particularly from the river to the sea, I mean, that's like the contentious statement, is getting more moderated on one side over the other. That bias is fairly obvious. I think that it would be difficult for them to prove that wasn't happening.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So there was some doom and gloom a little bit in this talk, but I also kind of like us to leave with some message of hope. Our previous speaker, Deepak Negi, he talked about using the power of narrative to take the power back, bring the power back to people. I was in a meeting with the Rise Against Big Tech yesterday. I'll put their URL in the chat. They're doing great work where there's like a very large amount of people of a bunch of different movements who are very motivated to move away from big tech. And they just need somebody to build those alternatives. And so like one great example of an alternative that has been built that people can start using right away, replace your Gemini and ChatGPT with Torah, for example. So that's something we can do right away. There's also Upscrolled, right, which is to replace Instagram, Twitter. That takes a little bit more time and effort to replace because the users have to move, right? You got to go where the users are, right? But you can start small and build, and so we can take our power back, and that's definitely something we should work towards.
Absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean for it to sound so cynical. I think it's just innate in British character. You just got to be as negative as possible. But there is also a lot to be positive about, though, right? Like I think that any moment in history where there is extreme oppression or there is extreme dissent, just injustice in general, it's always lots of people, small people with no real power or no sort of big titles that make the difference. I think Howard Zinn has a really fantastic quote about this. I can't remember it. I'm not going to butcher it. But basically, us doing this, us continuing to have a conversation and not shutting up, or being moderated and being like, that's kind of wrong, I should probably talk to some people about this, or act in a way that is counter to this narrative. That is how things change. And it seems very depressing whilst you're doing it because you can't see the wood for the trees, and you meet with lots of people like this, and the outlook isn't great. But crazier things have happened, right? Like we used to think that kings were God-given and that they were always going to rule over us, and where are they now? Right. So there's work to be done, but it's not all bad.
It's not all bad. It's yeah. Awesome. All right.
Also check out Tech for Palestine as well. Sorry.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Excellent. So the Tech for Palestine has amazing projects. Torah, they were supporting Torah. They're supporting Haq Now, Boycat, which we featured a few weeks ago. The Wall plugin that helps you point out Israeli businesses and websites and avoid them, right? And like 60 or 70 other projects besides that. Lots of amazing work happening there. So definitely an organization to support, to potentially support financially, and also to potentially volunteer with. And unlike the name suggests, it's not just tech. It's actually like a full-on movement. So I highly recommend all the non-technical people here to consider supporting them and volunteering with them, because they're doing great work, and they're always in need of non-technical people as well. all sorts of disciplines. So no matter what your discipline is, there's probably a place there for you. All right, cool, awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Ollie. Thank you, everyone else, for being here. I always appreciate every single one of you, and the meetings continue weekly for you guys. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you for your time, Ollie.
Thank you very much for having me. I apologize. It was a little bit more
Thanks,
chaotic than I was expecting, but I appreciate you all for being here, and I appreciate you reading the report as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ollie. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, guys.